I believe in Jesus, by the way. We'll talk about that.
Oh.
I'm reading The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's convincing evidence.
What do you think? I throw people out of the club here? If you believe in whatever you want.
I didn't. I went to Catholic school my whole life, but after reading this book, Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, the factual evidence that he existed is kind of overwhelming.
I'd like to see that because the factual evidence that he existed has always been underwhelming. In fact, it's always...
Read Case for Christ.
Yeah, I
Give
will.
it a shot by Lee Strobel.
This is based on what? Archaeological finds?
Archaeological finds.
New ones?
Theological finds. Ivy League.
What are theological finds?
Bill, ready for this?
Yeah.
If I told you, okay, if I told you factual evidence about Alexander the Great, you would believe me.
Okay, but even still, it's a silly point because who cares if Jesus lived? It's whether he's then died and was reborn and is, up in heaven with his Father who's really him.
Okay.
That's the part where the rubber meets the road. Maybe he existed. I agree. That's
fine.
Absolutely possible. Fine. He may have existed.
But according to Case for Christ, independent sources who didn't know each other, who wrote about him within 20 years of his death, talked about these miracles happening as
intelligence and humor frequently collide in this audio version of Club Random. Beyond comedy, Bill Maher and comedian Chris Distefano argue about historical belief and skepticism. Even after having influenced nations for almost 2 millennia, the existence of Jesus Christ is still up for debate and subject to various interpretations. Chris approaches a platform with fervor and conviction, citing Lee Strobel's justification of Christ as his main source of support. He describes the book as a compilation of facts rather than just a defense of faith. He asserts that anecdotal, theological, and historical evidence all contribute to the reconciliation of belief and reality. He supports Jesus' veracity as a historical figure by pointing to the consistency of a number of testimonies and ancient tales that are purportedly independent sources. Bill Maher, renowned for his sardonic sarcasm and unwavering skepticism, is not persuaded. Chris mostly relies on a collection of anecdotes collected by religiously motivated individuals many years after the occurrences. Maher challenges the lack of modern documentation, the historical gaps, and the dependence on oral traditions. He claims that faith, not fact, is the reason these legends have persisted for millennia. What has remained is not historical proof, but rather the product of decades of religiously motivated storytelling. A friendly debate soon turns into a bloody ideological battle. The definition of truth is not only up for debate because there are 2 schools of thinking on the subject. There are traditional and religious viewpoints, but there is also a need for critical thinking and empirical data. The extent to which our cultural background or sense of purpose shapes our thinking, and how we know what we know are topics of debate.
100 years after he died.
Chris, I'm going to have to burst your bubble now because here's I have to spit a couple of facts at you that are kind of going to under. Okay.
It's Hollywood.
There's only 2 sources in the Bible. Okay. There's the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay. There's also another guy, Josephus, who wasn't accepted, but read the Case for Christ.
Not in the Bible.
Okay.
But the Bible is itself an anthology. They found some few decades ago the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were other books that were just basically edited out. So right away we know a person decided what constituted the Bible, and just some stuff wound up on the cutting room floor.
I get it. Council of Nicaea. I get it.
Council of Nicaea, yes.
325 AD. Yes. That's when they decided the Christian religion. I agree with you.
Right.
I'm with you on that.
I remember that.
But I'm telling you, read this book.
That's Emperor Constantine.
Shout out Constantine, Turkey, all that.
Well, the first one...
Constantinople.
The first one to change the Roman Empire to a Christian empire.
They decided all the holidays.
Took 3 centuries.
I get it. And listen, Bill, I'm with you on that.
But here's the important...
A long-standing conflict between those who treat such matters with critical skepticism and others who rely on faith-based claims is brought to light by this examination of Jesus' historical presence. The skeptics who question the authenticity of religious scriptures as historical documents and who disagree with Lee Strobel's defense of Christ, which is supported by references to alleged eyewitnesses, gospel stories, and archaeological findings, are often brought up by Chris and his supporters. When taken as a whole, these components offer strong proof that Jesus not only existed, but also lived and taught in a way that validated the spiritual legacy that has been attributed to him. Critics assert that oral traditions may be misunderstood or distorted. particularly when they are transmitted via generations of believers with theological agendas, because many of the publications listed, including the Gospels, were written decades after Jesus' life. The credibility of such assertions is called into question due to the dearth of modern, non-religious documentation. From Jesus, the emphasis shifts to how people assess historical reality, including what constitutes reliable evidence and whether a belief is sound even in the absence of supporting facts. These problems lie at the core of the basic conflict between academia and religion, which is a reflection of larger cultural debates over pursuit, preservation, and analysis of truth.
You make a point, but let me just quickly. The game of telephone, yes, I agree with you that point, but the game of telephone in Jesus' times, according to Lee Strobel in The Case of Christ, was the simple fact of we're playing the game of telephone. There's 10 people here. The game of telephone, as we know it today, is you say something in my ear and then it goes around 10 times, and by the time it gets to you, it's something radically different. This game of telephone, this ancient game of telephone was, but you tell it to me, then the third guy confirms what you said before it goes to the fourth guy. So there's a level of checking, checks and balances.
Chris, you're working too hard. If you want to believe this shit, believe it. You don't have to convince me or
I'm just convincing you of Case for Christ.
Or construct this scaffolding to which you hang this belief. Just believe it. It's all good.
Okay.
Don't
come to me, and when you die at St. Peter's, I'm not getting you in.
But you know, I can't go there with you. It's just, you know, it's silly. And
well, I'm just saying, it's nice.
As the argument heats up, Maher opposes Chris's fervent defense of the idea of a cohesive narrative backed by archaic checks and balances. He compares oral tradition to a game of telephone, since stories are never the same when they are told, although the general concept may remain the same. The details he provides are often shaped by the individuals telling the narrative. According to Chris, having perfect documentation is not necessary for having faith in Jesus. In addition to whether Jesus lived, the question is whether his claims of divinity, miracles, and resurrection are supported by logic and evidence. According to him, beliefs ought to be tested rather than taken for granted. It's about the links between the stories, the power of the lessons to transform people, and the larger historical relevance of matter.
That's the order in the Bible. The first gospel, Mark, is 70 AD. Jesus dies in 33. So that's 40 years almost after he died.
Okay.
So not contemporaries. Paul comes before the gospel writers. He's writing around the year 50. In the 50s.
Okay.
So he's much closer to Jesus's time. So you'd think he would know more about Jesus than the people who came later, but actually St. Paul knows almost nothing about Jesus. He barely conceives of him as something as a person who lived on earth. There's no details about his life like they are in the Gospels. So the people who came later know more than the person who wrote earlier. Just some food for thought.
But, okay, I understand. But he does acknowledge at some point, right? Paul, aka Saul, knows that Jesus existed, right? He talks about him.
He talks about, I'm saying he conceives him as a Godhead. He doesn't have this, it's not the narrative that's in the Gospels of Jesus went around and he did miracles and he did stuff and everybody loved him and he gets quoted a lot. He makes speeches, blessed are the meek. You know, he has adventures. He goes into the desert. It's a whole thing.
But what about...
And then at the end, it's